Alright everybody, welcome back! So this past week I just went ahead and released those battle rating changes that we talked about on my previous video, and I've already said my mind on those, so I'm not really going to talk about what exactly has changed and my thoughts on that. But one of the vehicles that did get changed that no one's talked about yet was the Mirage IIIC. So this aircraft has really just not been in a great spot for a while now. It's flareless, which is a massive issue at this battle rating. It was at 10.3, and at the exact same battle rating, you get the Mirage IIIE, which got countermeasures and the exact same missile kit. Now, the Mirage IIIE was less agile, but getting those countermeasures really makes all the difference, especially when you're fighting stuff like AIM-9Ls and everything else, and 10.3 was really not a favorable matchmaker. So you'd be going up against stuff with, for example, R60Ms without flares. You can probably see where the issue lied. Now, guys, you went ahead and moved it down to 10.0, and for me at least, this has been a much more favorable matchmaker. I've been getting mostly 10.3, 9.3 games, and sometimes lower than that. I've got one 9.0 game while I was playing, although unfortunately I crashed into the mountain on takeoff, which is why you won't be seeing that in this video today. To be quite frank, I was not expecting to enjoy this plane whenever I first queued it up. I thought I'd try it once or twice, see that it was doing terrible, and then go on with my day. But after playing this thing all night, I just had to go ahead and make a video on it because I was just actually having a blast. I wasn't running into that many vehicles which had all-aspect missiles, and those which I did never seemed to shoot at me. Like, for example, this A-10 in front of me right here. For a 10.0, the Mirage is in a very good spot. Now, I mentioned earlier that the 3E was heavier, and so of course it has worse flight performance than the 3C. The 3C has a pretty competitive flat model for the battle rating, assuming that you like deltas, of course. It does have the normal delta issue of bleeding off a lot of speed whenever you first turn, but at least in this case, because you are lighter than the 3E, this of course gives a lighter wing loading, which means less speed bleed, and in this case you also have a better thrust to weight ratio than the 3E as well. So overall it just handles much better at basically every speed. One of the really cool things about this plane now is that means France gets a plane that has actually pretty competent radar missiles for the battle rating at 10.0. As you can see right there, I just beamed an F-104 out of the sky. This gets the R530. And while the R530 isn't anything amazing, for 10.0, it's either the best or the second best radar missile, depending on what you prefer. The other contender, of course, is the AIM-7D, and personally, I think I'd rather take the R530 unless the guy is running chaff. Because, of course, the R530 is a pulse missile, and if y'all have seen any of my other videos, you'll know exactly what that means. For those of y'all who don't, I'll go ahead and explain it real quick. But radar missiles have two different types of seeker heads. A pulse seeker head does not have speed gating, so if it sees chaff, it goes for chaff. So, if someone pops a thing of chaff and your radar locks onto it, the missile will also go for that chaff, no matter what aspect it's in. CW seeker heads, on the other hand, use what's called a Doppler gate, which looks at the relative speed of the radar contacts. So if you're going head-on with somebody and they pop chaff, there is a greater speed difference between your aircraft and the oncoming aircraft than there is between your aircraft and the chaff, because the chaff will be hanging almost stationary midair. So even if your radar switch is locked to that chaff, the missile will continue guiding on it. So that does come in useful sometimes with the AIM-7D, but generally the performance of the missile is so low that most of the time the 7D is missing from my instance anyways. The extended burn time of the R530 just generally makes it a better missile, at least from my experience. And a lot of aircraft either don't have chaff or aren't running chaff in the first place at this battle rating, so that's kind of a unlikely situation to get in the first place. So switching off of weapons for a second, you may have noticed in the background that I screwed up and I managed to get hit in my wing. There's very light damage. You may notice my aircraft is wobbling a lot every time I pull, and that is making it extremely difficult for me to actually get my guns on target, because that Crusader right there should have been dead. If I wasn't damaged, he almost certainly would have been dead. Unfortunately though, my wing was slightly redded out in one section and yellowed out in the rest, and for some reason the Mirage is so sensitive to those little bits of damage that it was enough to throw me off. This will also affect you whenever you're neg-G'ing as well, and you may have noticed me missing some shots earlier when I was trying that as well. So if you can, avoid getting hit at all. Not that you want to get hit in any aircraft, but this is not one of the ones that can take a hit and keep on flying and being relatively combat effective. So of course, after taking out this Crusader, I will go back to base and land. I'm going to grab some more magics while I'm at it, because of course that is the main advantage of this plane at 10.0. It gets the magic missile. And you may have seen my videos on the Magic 2 buff. The Magic 1 also got its agility buffs and drag buffs as well. Now, of course, it may not be all aspect at this battle rating, but it is still an incredibly agile missile. And it is not going to have any issues, especially because a lot of the planes you're going to be fighting now are flareless. You also get an IR version of the R530, the R530E, and I'm going to be using that right here in this F104J. It has relatively extended range compared to the Magic. Of course, it's not as effective just because it's only a 15G missile, but when it comes to less agile planes like the F104, for example, that does not matter at all. And it's incredibly funny to use as well. So I would recommend bringing it up tiers. If you get a down tier, I would typically recommend bringing the radar missile, just because you're generally going to have people that are climbing high and either don't have an RW bar or don't have chaff, and that'll give you a relatively easy shot on them with that radar missile in the head-on. Speaking of, that is another one of the major disadvantages of the aircraft. So it's not just not having flares, it also doesn't have an RW bar. So if you do happen to get up tiered into like 11.0, for example, I would not recommend climbing at all, because you will have no idea if somebody is locking onto you and is about to fire an AIM-7E2 at you. Stay low, use your ground clutter, because the only things you can face that have competent radar missiles like the AIM-7E2 also do not have any sort of full stopper. That all starts at 11.3. MiG-23M technically has radar missiles with MTI, which could lock onto you this low to the ground, but let's just be realistic, the R-23R is absolutely terrible. So yeah, I mean, that's about it for the Mirage IIIC. Like I said earlier, I was really not expecting to enjoy this, but I actually had a really good time filming this video, and I might recommend giving it a shot. Just keep in mind, you are flareless and you have to be careful when it comes to picking exactly what you're going to fight against. Because if you do happen to get into 11.0 game like the one that I'm in right here, you may not get so lucky to just run into F4C's bombing. You may run into, for example, a MiG-21 BIS with R60M that's just going to absolutely obliterate you. You can, of course, fire your magics at their missile in the head-on, or bring rocket pods if you really wish to do so, but personally I don't like doing that because that does kill your performance. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and I'll catch y'all next time. So, peace, y'all.